All right. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be talking about site building, specifically when it comes to translations, layout builder, and regionalizing all of that. This will include configuration for the technical as well as usage for content teams. But there's a special limited offer just for y'all since, there we go. Since this really is incredibly easy and fast to do, we're going to save you time. So the talk is 60% more efficient and faster. That means it's going to be a short talk. We have a live tugboat instance up at the end, so if there's any questions, any kind of details and elaboration anyone's looking for, we can kind of dive through that. And hopefully this isn't like GDQ where we try to get a speed run and then absolutely fail with the demo space, but it's been working so far. So I'm Dan, account lead at Chromatic.
And I'm Matt, senior developer at Chromatic.
And again, we're not going to do any advertisement. We're going to jump right in. The foundation of this talk was inspired by a client that was using a multi-site setup to manage regionalization. And with a suite of several products and regulations about which product can be marketed to which regions, source of truth and duplication became a real problem. Applicably, this meant they had to recreate nodes over and over again.
The business logic was actually quite simple. However, the Drupal setup was not. We realized we could simplify their setup by moving to a single site, but with the addition of allowing them to group their content by region. This also made life a lot easier for site editors who didn't have to go log into different multi-sites anymore. With regionalization in place, we were able to control the content presented to visitors so they see what's relevant to them, whilst improving the building experience that the client was used to. So we didn't have to change any of their current workflows. It was still very familiar. It was just there's an extra layer or some tagging that needed to happen. So this talk will cover initial translation setup, any tips for working with translations alongside Layout Builder, and also grouping content by geographical region as well as in addition to language, and also how our CDN might be able to help us with that process.
So real quickly to wrap up the whys, why would you do all of this? The value of this spans across teams and users. For one, this automatically helps you reach a wider audience, pretty no duh. You'll get a more granular control over content and who sees that content. And this also extends to site content crawling as well. This means you can gain SEO authority in regions you may not have previously had authority in. Lastly, this makes source of truth and content aggregation more simple and trustworthy. Now, before moving on, let's cover some basic requirements. Of course, you'll need Layout Builder installed. This is a Layout Builder talk. But in addition, you'll need 3 other modules that will make site building and translations with Layout Builder possible. Those are listed here, but for posterity, those are Layout Builder Discovery, Layout Builder Browser, and most importantly, Layout Builder Asymmetric Translation. You'll also need at least 2 languages configured in Drupal and an audience that accesses the site from 2 different geographic regions or more. Now, we've broken this talk into 4 major sections, with the first being on translations. We'll next cover Layout Builder. We'll do another section on regionalization, and finally, we'll wrap it all up by comparing paragraphs versus Layout Builder blocks, when you would use one or the other, and the benefits or kind of the usage of both of those. Right, so as we mentioned, you'll need more than your default language to be configured. Drupal comes with a preset of over 100 languages, and selecting from this list will automatically provide its corresponding ISO standard language code, or shortened to lang code as an attribute, along with a customizable name label and writing direction. Can everyone see that up close? This is also going to be accessible online. We'll have a QR code at the end so you can see details. You can also add your custom language, your own custom language, and this is available all the way at the absolute bottom of the list in the selector. However, it's crucial to note that you must not set a language code that conflicts with any other ISO standard lang code. And those can even go beyond the 100 that come custom with Drupal. This will cause plenty of conflicts both within the admin UI for content editors that are trying to translate content and for your end users. Thankfully, Drupal does provide a helpful link that will help you get more details, and there's a link in this link that has a bunch of the lang codes that correspond to languages.
So also don't forget to configure how you want language negotiation to happen. So on this screen, we can see some of the key options, which is typically URL at the top. That's what we would recommend first of all. And browser language preference after that, which looks at the HTTP accept header to see what the user actually wants to receive as their language. So key thing here is you can obviously drag and drop these items into different orders as well. Now that we have languages configured, we need to specify what editors can translate. By default, Drupal translations will provide node translations in most of their fields, but you can adjust this as you need. And also, this is where you would specify the default, so the fallback language for any content type like article or basic page, for example, there. So that's if all your other language negotiations fail and a user picks Spanish, for example, and you don't have a translation yet, it would fall back to this as your default.
So long as you're making use of trans functions and templating and pre-processing, Drupal will be able to log these strings in the user interface section, translation section, which again, there's paths over here just in case you want to know where to do that. I know some of this is no doubt for us, but just in case. And then your content team can then provide a translation for any and all of this baked in text. It is important to know that this is sensitive, spaces, case sensitive. You have to get it exactly what you're searching for. It has to be the exact string that you have baked in your templating and pre-processing.
In addition to translating strings, as Dan just showed, we also now get the Translate tab, which allows us to translate typical page content. Here's an example where we have an English default page and a Spanish translation, and then you can add French and other languages as needed.
Just a quick note that this UI is almost how all content entities get translated. It looks pretty much the same, even though this is a node translate view. Mm-hmm. However, if you're getting to translations just now and you already have content, this all might seem very insurmountable, right? Especially the whole strings baked in templates. As usual, there is a module for that, and it's called the Translation Management Tool. You can short name that to TMGMT. That's also the name of the module, the short name of the module. And this will allow you to essentially project manage translations all within the Drupal admin UI. TMGMT will let you assign translation jobs, whether an entire content type or individual entities or entire paragraph type, to a provider. Now, a provider can either be a Drupal user, a third-party API like TransPerfect, Google Translate, DeepL, so on and so forth, or agent. We've heard that a lot in this DrupalCon so far. You can pass it to agents, or you can get an XLIF file, XLIFF file. This file can then be sent to a translator. It looks like XML, right? Just a bunch of stuff in an XML file. And then that translator can iterate on it, and then they'll return it back to you, and you import it into Drupal, and that's it. Your content types, your entities, your node that you requested will then receive that XLIF and provide a translation layer for the job. Now, the takeaway here is delegation is elevation. You know, why would you do something yourself when someone can do it way better than you? And then you also don't have to do it.
So also before we move on to Layout Builder, we wanted to point out the out-of-the-box language switcher UI element that Drupal gives us. So it would need theming, but it basically allows any user to switch on the front end easily. If they happen to be on a node, as I said, that doesn't have a translation, the default behavior is that it would fall back and just load your default language. So if we hit United Kingdom, it would potentially drop back and just show the US version on this page. But yeah, you don't need to do any custom coding other than theming.
And just so it's clear, just real quick, Matt.
Yeah.
This is what you get. This is what gets spit out.
Right.
Just an unthemed, unordered list, UL unordered list, and then this is an example of how we themed the language switcher.
I think it's you.
Thank you. Now, if you aren't familiar with Layout Builder, which seems unlikely, just considering how many talks have been about Layout Builder, but just in case, let's provide a super quick intro on it. Layout Builder allows content editors to customize the content of a page using components without having to deal with templates or UI-less paragraphs. These components or blocks can do anything that designers and engineers build into them, but their composition on the node is entirely controlled by the content team. These blocks sit on top of the node layout section. That's important to note, because all of that seems pretty obvious, right? Like we're all familiar with that kind of theming. Even paragraphs do that. Though the vast majority of entities in Drupal are translatable, Layout Builder does not come with that same sort of translatability. Since they're more like floating entities that get attached to nodes, their contents are kind of like attachments on attachments, right? That means out of the box, you cannot have two translation layers with different layout blocks. That is, without the asymmetric translation module. This module allows you to have a completely different set of layout contents and their block instances between translation layers. So to make layout translatable is to asymmetrically divide the translation layer's connection to a single layout with a separate layout instance. Two translation layers then require two layout instances. Now, once you've installed and enabled asymmetric translation, you'll need to configure contents layout field as translatable. Again, as Matt was noting, it's really easy. You click layout. And this is done by the content language and translation section. You'll also want to make sure that the layout field is enabled for the node's form display. The bonus here is that you can set it so editors don't have to start from scratch on the new translation layer. It'll just copy over and clone the origin language that you're translating from. It'll just copy over the layout block contents. And again, it's a separate layer, so it's another set of block instances. Now you can go into the layout and update the text for all the blocks and their fields as desired without having to recreate all of it from the ground up. Okay, that's cool. This makes it so much easier for content editors to plug in translations. The bad news is that you currently cannot include Layout Builder block contents in translation management jobs. But the good news is this issue that aims to solve this is very close to being resolved. And it's been going on for 5 years with a lot of Drupal arguments as Layout Builder blocks aren't supposed to be this, they're detached entities, but everyone came together and they decided, yes, it should actually be translatable. And so that's coming very soon. It's mergeable, but we all know that doesn't mean anything. Okay, so what can you do in the meantime? Well, you still have manual translations, and if your translators are Drupal users, there isn't really much of a problem to solve here, right? Especially if you have TM/GMT, you can just assign your translators to a node, and if it has Layout Builder block on it, they'll just clone the layout. They're all Drupal users, so long as they have the right roles, fine, just do it by hand, right? On the other hand, if you have a lot of nodes to translate, even a translation team can get worn out doing so. There is another option outside of just grabbing API wires and connecting them manually with some custom handmade aggregator and then blowing up the worlds like this kitty here in the center. Third-party services like Global Link Web can translate your content on the user side by translating it at the DOM level. Now, hold on for a minute. That sounds kind of crazy, right? But the translations can be customized by your team and can even be integrated with AI services like DeepL and its glossary system. So you don't have to just deal with a flat, oh, the AI translated it like this. Your team can actually control the terms, the terminology, and have its own dictionary that gets layered onto this DOM layer. This tool will even translate the content for SEO crawling, as well as Drupal form interactions like search, again by creating a separate DOM layer for the translations. So even though Drupal is still getting your origin language, all the interaction is happening on the origin language, the user sees the translation layer.
And next we have regionalization, which we can also describe as localization or regional customization. So while translation deals basically just with more than one language, regionalization adapts that to focus on multiple geographic groups in addition to multiple language. And each of these geographic groups could have the exact same language, so they could both be in English, or they might both have different translations on top of them. So, for example, like one example would be on our North American site, we'd have English, Spanish. On the European site, we might have English and French and German. But the important difference here is that the product groups and the actual content itself, including even coloring, branding, could change as well. How could we handle this in Drupal? If you're only using one language per region, you might be able to just get away with using translation to do that if it's a one-to-one mapping. But if you need more flexibility, it would be worth considering layering grouping by region plus translation separately. So one example that we've used in the past is simply to use a region taxonomy to build out the languages that you might need, followed by tagging your content with that region. And then there are different ways to handle visibility on the front end. So you might be able to use context to set a path-based rule to say if it's /North America, we're only showing these blocks and this region's content. Anything beyond that would require some custom coding, though. And then building upon the language switcher we had before, we would also now have to consider a region switcher. So in the previous slide, we showed that would be taxonomy based. So that doesn't come out of the box, but in the past we've built something like this where you'll see a modal that lists all of those regions and will redirect people as needed to the correct path-based structure. The next thing to keep in mind, just so that you don't end up sending users in a redirect loop, is when they make a choice, we can obviously cookie that decision that they just made so that we can come back to it later and not keep pushing them away to the wrong place. So again, just to show how this might differ from translation, here we have both two example demo homepages, both in English, but we could change things like titles, the text, the branding, colors, and so on. Like on one side, we might have colorful versus color with a U. So the language really doesn't play a part in this. Next, we wanted to look at region detection. So we should try to improve user experience by directing people to the right place. Like if I flew to Germany and opened the site there, I'd expect to see products that are relevant to me. So one of the ways we can do this is by using the user's IP address and a geolocation database. If we have multiple languages in addition to regions, we can also then layer this with our previous negotiation options like the accept language header, so that we can then direct people to, if I landed in Germany, I wouldn't want the site in German, I'd want the German content, but I'd want the English version of the site. So you're not forcing people to see a different language just because of their location. And yeah, a note here that we have is to avoid using geolocation for language. The ability to speak a language is the property of the person, not the location that they're currently in. So we often work with Platform SH, who use a Fastly CDN, but a lot of this would apply to Cloudflare, CloudFront, and so on as well. And one of the things they provide out of the box is geolocation data. You may have to enable it or pass it through in the headers, but you can actually get a lot of this data for free without having to go elsewhere to find it. So this can be a good alternative to a paid service. So as you can see, it gets pretty granular. We have country name all the way down to city and area code and postal codes as well. Continuing the Fastly example, to keep things really high performance, we can actually use Fastly to handle even the redirection for us. So before it even gets to your Drupal site, we've already directed traffic to where it needs to go. So this is a very high-level example, but Fastly VCL is a programming language that's part of their architecture, and it lets you commit code to change the configuration of your CDN. This VCL receive subroutine is executed, as I said, before anything happens, like it's before your cache. So the example here is if the user's in any of these countries, we'll redirect them to /EU for our demo site. And as we mentioned previously with the language switcher or region switcher, if you've dropped a cookie, we can also check for that directly in the CDN. So the CDN can look for that cookie and avoid bouncing people if they don't need to be. So it's pretty good. You don't need to go and build a custom Drupal module or even JavaScript to do this. It can be done right here on the edge. Yeah, I just had a note to say that there are a bunch of examples on this and examples of the data you can get, as well as implementation tips.
On Fastly's docs, right?
On Fastly's docs, yeah, and the same for Cloudflare, CloudFront, and so on. Alternatives would include the Smart IP and GeoIP modules, which are obviously Drupal modules, but they're also powerful tools for doing what we just highlighted in Fastly. They generally work with a paid database as well, so you would go and buy a database from MaxMind, for example, and get a subscription to that, and then these modules would help you interface with it and give you a way of accessing that data within Drupal. And custom is always an option too, so we could go to MaxMind ourselves and build a little API endpoint, or just use JavaScript to handle the redirection. Just keep in mind that whatever database you use, obviously it's not going to be 100% accurate. Fastly updates twice a week, but generally the more granular you get, the less accurate it's going to be, like if you're trying to get someone's city versus their country or continent. Oh, damn.
Now to personally identifiable information, or PII or PI or P. Global policies are an incredibly esoteric subject, I'm sure, as we all are aware of, and I'd be baffled if any of us had a really good, firm, confident understanding of the rules of all the regimes. I mean, these aren't even all the regimes. And the African Union Convention is a massive thing on top of a bunch of other separate conventions within the continent. So we highly suggest, no matter what is on this chart or that comes out of my mouth, that you verify any and all functionality you have in place that collects any sort of data about your users, location or otherwise, with your legal team, whether you're dropping cookies or not. I'd also suggest to watch Jürgen Haas's presentation earlier today on what they're building at Drupal CMS. You were there as well. It's an
really good.
excellent talk, a really great kind of resetting of how we look at privacy, not as compliance, but as a provision we give to our users. So especially in these cases, you know, we're saying you need to notice or consent, or you don't, or no, who knows, right? This shouldn't be about compliance. It should be about thinking about your end user. But having said all that, if we could sum some of this up to give you at least something to go with from here, out of all the regimes listed, we found two common parameters that suggest you should be letting your users know if you're collecting information about them. And I'd added here, and dropping a cookie, but I don't even think you need to drop a cookie to be considered as needing to comply or needing to be aware of these things. I mean, the obvious individual identifiers like name and ID numbers, those are unanimously considered PII, right? There's no doubt. You can really identify someone if you know their full name, especially if you have their ID numbers. Location, especially IP address, and sometimes region, is considered PII when it is collected in addition to any other user data that could help you individually identify a person. And this could include behavior. The documents are a little bit different. There's the wording around it is different, but they all seem to consider behavior as a secondary piece of data for your user. So if you think about that, that could include time and flow across your site. In other words, user analytics. That counts as behavior, right? And then lastly, interestingly, our read of China and California's policies make it seem like they consider just knowing a person's country is enough to count as data, PII data. Okay, let's wrap this up and let's compare paragraphs versus layout builder and when you would typically provision a site for one or the other. Which do you choose? Paragraph or layout builder, or both? Well, first off, it should be noted that Experience Builder looks to be layered on top or at minimum an extension or evolution of Layout Builder. If anyone's been in Drupal long enough, that's sort of like how Layout Builder was to panels, right? Therefore, if you as an agency or an engineer are looking to start working more in XB, it might help to get used to LB in the meantime. Experience Builder, layout. Secondly, you'll likely find that using Layout Builder does not inherently mean scrapping paragraphs altogether. Some inline blocks will still benefit from paragraphs' unique usage and structure. For instance, if you're creating a carousel slider that accepts an array of slides, the slides might be best served as a nested paragraph type. Admin themes aside, we'll see paragraph, and I know it's confusing because the admin themes are different, Jin and Claro at the bottom. Those aside, the actual form display UI is exactly the same between paragraphs in the node edit view and inline blocks in the layout edit view. While you can generate a preview link for nodes, layout shows themed blocks right up front. This saves you from having to switch back and forth between preview link and edit view for paragraphs. Layout provides a way to go atomic right out of the box as well. You can create inline blocks that are singular, like a card versus cards, and then allow content editors to decide how many columns or what precisely those columns are, like a side versus main, they want, and place regions in each, or place blocks in each. To be fair, it looks like you can do this with layout paragraphs. so it's not that far from paragraphs. And lastly, and probably more importantly, when comparing the two, especially in the context of this talk, paragraphs can actually be translated via TM-GMT. So those can actually be included in your project management translation workflow. Whereas Layout Builder, you still have to wait for those. And that might wrap up this whole talk, right? And if you're on paragraphs and you're trying to decide whether to wait for XB in a year or so, or just to move to Layout Builder right now, that might be what the pivot point is, translatability, especially for large amounts of content. And that's our talk. As noted, you can grab the QR code there and it'll lead to the PDF with the speaker notes. And again, mention we do have a bit of a demo space that we can show if anyone wants to get into any detailed UI and configuration. It doesn't have a CDN in the front, so we won't be able to show any region negotiation, but we could show any other configuration stuff if anyone wants to see it a little bit bigger, or if there's any other questions anyone might have. Thank you. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah, sure. There's a mic here too.
What was the module for content grouping?
What was that again?
What was the module for content grouping?
The question is, what was the module for content grouping? I think it's just context, right? And taxonomy?
Yeah, we just used taxonomy. So we just simply used a taxonomy vocabulary, added that selector to the content we needed to. And then the part that's a little more tricky and will take some thought is how you want to negotiate how you serve up the content from each taxonomy. So context was one example of being able to do that. So yeah, context is a contrib module and allows you to put rules in place, like when these different conditions are met, it does this result. So one of those conditions could be if you're on /EU or /Europe, these things happen, including serving specific blocks to that region.
I'd also add, you can not, that taxonomy can be anything. It could be subsidiaries of a company. It could be sub-regions of a region. And you could still use regions to negotiate what region gets what subsidiary company's translation layer or taxonomy grouping. So we showed an example of it being regions or countries, regimes, but it's a taxonomy, so you could do anything. You could point anyone anywhere in that regard. Yeah. Any other questions? No? All right. I mean, we still have a little bit of time. Did anyone want to see it in Tugboat? Oh, damn it. Just waiting for Jill to say, nah. I did. Oh, let me just do it. Oop. Did everyone got the QR code? Okay, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and close this then. Yeah. Oh.
I didn't find anything good in it.
You got this, right?
Yeah, where's the? There we go. Okay, cool. So this is gonna be. Let me try to go this way. Is there anything anyone wanted to look at specifically, like any layout setup, layout negotiation, translating content, maybe the TM-GMT workflow?
Yeah, let's
Sorry.
just see it in action. Give us a quick
Like translating content? Yeah, okay, cool, let's do it. Yeah, wow, this is gonna be, I'm gonna do this. Try to get to the side here. Okay, all right, let's create a new piece of content here. Whoop. Okay, I'm gonna make a basic page. This is the only content type that we have, provision with Layout Builder. No. I'm gonna leave it as English for my default language. Let's go ahead and throw a paragraph on here. And let's just go ahead and save it. I'm going to skip the region taxonomy. Again, we do not have that. We don't have a CD in front, so we can't really negotiate on that. And then we're going to translate it. You'll see here in the tab menu. Now there's two ways that we can do this. We can just do it the core way and add a translation, right? So let's translate this to Spanish. And just that. Yeah, I know. I could have done it. I could have. Okay, and let's go ahead and save it, right? And then if we switch our content, or if we switch the context to Spanish, it didn't work, because of course, it's DrupalCon. You can't do this. Why would it work? Probably. I'm just gonna force it though. Oh no, it is there. Okay. I do have language negotiation, and actually that's a really good point. When Matt was talking about setting up the hierarchy of how to negotiate your language, even in the UI, you might find you need to really tweak that for your use cases. And I'm gonna look down. I'm gonna ask you, where's that done again?
I just clicked
Are you clear? Oh. No, that's not it. Let's go back. Is it under
You were almost there.
this content language translation?
What are you looking for?
The negotiation of
Okay,
user
so
versus.
language. And then there'll be a detection.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, there we go. And we're gonna do. I have it set to user because I didn't want to see Afrikaans and when I was doing translations. So
just drag
instead, I'm
URL.
gonna do URL all the way up. Save it. Okay, now let's go back to that page. Let's go back to this, then to Spanish, and it's still not working. Let me make sure it's actually published.
It works on my screen, so.
Yeah. Oh, you know what's interesting? This doesn't have a source listed. Huh. Well, it didn't show up, but again, this is like GDQ. I wasn't looking for a speed run. I'll show the other way so that when you do get it set up on your side, you can see how to use the translation management tool. So instead of using the core add functionality over here to a language, you're going to get this operations details at the top here once you install TMG and you set your content type as translatable with this module, with this tool. You'll check the language you want, and we're just doing this for a node, so we'll follow up with like an actual content entity that can get this, and then we'll request translation. You can also add it to a cart. Again, this is meant to be project managed, so you're able to do a ton of these and then check out, but let's just do one for here. So you're gonna request the translation, you're gonna give it a name, no, right? And then you're gonna set the target language you want it to go to. I'm just gonna leave it at French. It'll let you know how many words are actually gonna be in there that are translatable, right? And then you get to set the provider or agent in the language of Drupal. Drupal user is anyone, again, that has role access to Drupal. And then file exchange is the XLIF that I was mentioning. And you can import as HTML or XLIF. In our experience, all the translation vendors we work with all wanted XLIF. No one wanted an HTML. And it seems to be a pretty unanimous syntax for receiving these. And then you can either save the job, it goes nowhere, or you can't, it saves in your project management as pending, or you can actually just go ahead and submit it to the provider. When you submit it, you're gonna get this download here for the XLIF, and it'll just download to your computer. It'll download the XLIF file. Frustratingly, it doesn't actually name the file as the label we just gave it. What's in a name? It calls it like job ID, and then it has a job ID number. I guess that could be helpful if you're juggling with job ID numbers, but just mindful of that. And you can actually go to your cart. You can see jobs that are that are currently open and the status that they're in. And it kind of gives you a bunch of metrics on that. Again, like if you had things in your cart and it wasn't set yet or you didn't download it yet, you can also access it again in this view. We didn't play around with continuous jobs, but there's supposedly a way that you can just have this be continuous too. So as your content team are creating a node of a certain content type, it'll just continue to like batch add to this cart. And if you configure it really well, again, with Drupal users or an XLIF download, you would just constantly pass it through. I didn't note this specifically, but TransPerfect and Global Link, which is its own module as well, they have their own module, can directly connect to TM/GMT, even outside of Drupal users. So that's another feature that's part of this. We didn't show that just because it requires an API key on their end and an account with them. But that's also another option there. I think there's a couple of others TMG have on the list. There's somewhere around 30 to 40 at this point. But I think TransPerfect's Global Link has been the most successful and foolproof in terms of connecting directly through this TM/GMT. And then real quick, unless anyone has something else they're interested in, you can do this for all content entities. Again, save for layout builder block, inline blocks. If we go to, let's say, I hate how Jin doesn't just have paragraphs as an option. But you can go here, and again, just like you would a node or a content block, you get a translate button, and you can tell TMG to translate every single instance of that block as a job, either XLIF or Drupal user, or again, an agent that you connect up. And it just counts like any other job.
So once the translation is done, and if you're not using some company with an integration back into Drupal, how does the translation get back in?
Yeah, great question. Let me get back to the translation jobs. I forgot to mention TMG comes with its own nav item as well on the nav, if I can get to it. It's going to be in your jobs, and it'll basically be pending. So I forgot which one we didn't download, but the one what's in the name? You would download it, and there's a way to then import from here. So after your translator hands you back the XLIF, you can manage, and then here we go. Yep, and then you just import the XLIF back in. Yeah, and it will one-to-one connect with the entity and translate all the strings for you. Yeah. Anything else? I think. Oh no, we have a little bit of time, right? So if anyone else is interested, keep going. Otherwise,
What's the worst thing you've ever had to do in terms of regions and language combinations?
I don't. That we have actually for the client that sparked this. We're about to do French, and for us region, we need to do just a specific set of postal codes. But for everywhere else in France, they get another layer, or just UK, I think. That's going to be weird.
Yeah.
And I was gonna mention in that VCL receive, you can actually make it real granular with your logic. We were only doing by country, but you can also then dig deeper and say if DE, and then if this postal code, use this translation layer. So that's going to be our next task coming up here in I think 2 months. Will be our next task for that client. Yeah.
And I think that's where regionalization beyond translation is going to play a part as well, because you might need more than just French for France. You might need to somehow group that as well, which we can. That's where naturally you go towards taxonomy to do that.
Yep. Yeah. If it's general and not regionalization, earlier this year, there was a layout builder revision block issue with asymmetric translations, and thank goodness the contributors resolved that, because even though you duplicated the cloned layout instance, every time you changed one block in the layer, it would then reflect to all instances of that block key. So that was a huge headache that stalled the layouts, the translation layers we were trying to do. But it got resolved, as most DrupalCon trip things have happened. Thanks to all of those that contributed to that. Otherwise, thanks everyone.
Thank you.